Welcome today to the third session of our new monthly meeting series, Another World is Possible, Feminist Answers to Big Questions. We are so grateful that you're here today for this very important discussion. And today we'll be discussing the big question on how do we achieve peace throughout the world. Please do use the chat freely for any questions that you may have, and do introduce yourselves. Today we have interpretation in Spanish, English, and French. So please choose the language that you'd like to listen to the meeting in using the globe icon at the bottom right of your Zoom screen. You should, could we move to the next slide, please? Even if you want to listen to us in English, please do select the English language in interpretation. I will now pass on the floor to the Spanish interpreters to make the announcement in Spanish.
Buenos días. Para conectar en español, por favor, vayan abajo de su pantalla y escojan interpretación de idiomas y luego escojan español. Es importante escoger un idioma porque se va a estar hablando en inglés, español y francés. Eso está ubicado en su pantalla. Y si están en un celular, esto está ubicado abajo a la derecha. Gracias. Merci.
Thank you so much. I will now pass the floor to our French interpreters so that they can make the announcement in French.
Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue. Il y a donc de l'interprétation disponible en anglais, espagnol et français. Si vous voulez écouter en français, il vous faut cliquer sur le symbole en forme de globe en bas de l'écran. Choisissez français, vous pouvez aussi couper l'audio original. Et si vous nous joignez depuis un téléphone portable, l'option se trouve en cliquant sur les 3 petits points. Merci, bonne réunion.
Thank you, Simon. Before we begin, I'd like to run you through some of the accessibility and logistics notes. So here's today's agenda. After the current logistic notes, our moderator will introduce the meeting, and we have some incredible speakers today who will deep dive into different feminist proposals and systemic solutions related to feminist peace. And at the end, we'll have a collective discussion where you have the open floor. You can also use the chat to put down any questions that you can have. Today, Shehnaz and Andrea, my colleagues, will be accessibility and safety coordinators. You can always write to them in the chat if you have any accessibility, safety, or connection concerns. I'd also like to note that this meeting is only open to WMG members as participants, but we will record the first hour of our meeting and share it on our YouTube and social media channels as a resource. The open discussion at the end will not be recorded. We also hope to have an article and an op-ed as an output of the series that we're very excited about, in addition to the video resources. If any of you would like to contribute to these, please do email any member of the Secretariat team. You can email Shehnaz, Andrea, or me. Today, this is a safe place. Please be mindful and respectful of diversity and intersectionality of all the speakers and participants. We do not tolerate discriminatory remarks, hate speech, denial of self-proclaimed identities, anti-rights discourse, and other forms of discrimination in such meetings. If any such incident occurs, the person will be removed from the Zoom platform after a warning. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to recognize all of the feminists who could not be here with us today. We honor the women human rights defenders who have lost their lives in struggle against war, policing, and militarism, and stand in solidarity with all the feminists across the globe who are resisting all forms of oppression as we speak here today. Without any further ado, I'd like to pass the floor to our North America organizing partner, ICRW's Spogme Emmett, to moderate our meeting today, to get us started by introducing the meeting topic, how we achieve peace throughout the world. Thank you. Spogme, the floor is all yours.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much, Maitri, for the introduction and for sharing the necessary information. My name is Spogme Ahmed, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a senior global policy advocate with the International Center for Research on Women, where I focus on all things feminist foreign policy and a North America organizing partner with the Women's Major Group, as I'm based in New York. It's such a pleasure to moderate today's monthly meeting with you all on a topic that is of particular interest to me: how can we achieve peace throughout the world? This session is part of our ongoing series, Another World is Possible: Feminist Answers to Big Questions, in which we invite feminist activists and experts to present solutions and alternatives to seemingly insurmountable challenges. Today, we have a really amazing lineup of speakers who will present solutions for peace around disarmament and demilitarization, feminist foreign policy, bodily autonomy, and migrant and refugee rights. So I'm so happy to be joined by 4 speakers, including Daniela Philipson of Internacional Feminista, Miloud of the Tamazight Women's Movement, Lara-Zuzan Golesorkhi of the Center for Migration, Gender and Justice, and Genevieve Riccoboni of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Our panelists have a lot of really useful information to present today, so I won't take over much of their time and we'll dive right into the discussion. So I'll first go to Genevieve of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, or WILPF, with the question: what are WILPF's concrete proposals for disarmament and demilitarization, and how can these lead to feminist peace? Genevieve, off to you.
Thank you so much, Swagme, and thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to the Women's Major Group for inviting me to speak today. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. My name is Genevieve Riccoboni. My pronouns are she, her. I work as the program associate in the Women, Peace and Security program at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. For 1 year, I was on the team of organizing partners for the Women's Major Group, so very close to my heart. And apologies, I don't have any slides, but this is also kind of a personal preference. I get a little distracted with slides sometimes. So today I'll be sharing a little bit about WILPF and specifically talking about disarmament and demilitarization and why these are essential components of feminist peace and linked with the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So a brief introduction to WILPF. We are a global peace organization that was founded over 100 years ago, actually, in 1915. We are a feminist anti-militarist organization that works together to prevent and resolve conflicts through nonviolent action. And we believe that militarism, patriarchy, and capitalism are among the root causes of conflict and violence. And so we work to address all of those simultaneously by promoting feminist perspectives about peace and security and addressing root causes of conflict. We are a membership organization, so there are currently around 41 sections and 5 groups across the world. Yeah, we have also a number of partners, including in the Middle East, North Africa region. So one of the founding goals of WILPF as an organization is total and universal disarmament, which means that we ultimately envision a world with no weapons and no violence. And so we advocate, of course, that's a huge goal. So we're advocating for policies and programs that help move us towards that world and chip away at the world we currently have, in which things are unfortunately going in the other direction. And before I get specifically into some of these policies, I think it's important to sort of take a step back and think about, there are reasons why member states are pursuing particular kinds of policies over others and how they define their interests. And a lot of how many governments define their interests are in terms of more militarized security. So definitions of security, how we think about security, how we think about safety is really essential for then creating the kinds of policies and programs that, make up all of that. And so we believe it's important to redefine security away from militarized terms, away from nationalist terms, and more towards human security, towards a focus on fulfillment of human rights. And so we work to stigmatize these things because, ultimately, if you define what it means to be safe, what it means to be secure in terms of having a strong military or spending a lot on weapons, you are going to have strong militaries, but you're going to have weak, under-resourced, and marginalized communities that are facing violence and that don't have their needs met. And these concepts can be applied across a lot of levels, whether it's at the local level, relating to police violence, to at the international level, working to abolish nuclear weapons. Apologies, I'll speak slower. So I think it would also be good if people could put in the chat throughout this discussion sort of what peace or security means to you and how you think about security, what security, what that means to you as a little bit of an interactive portion, and I can read out the answers later. So one of the ways that the feminist perspective on peace and security is located is in the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, which is the agenda that I work on. And it has 4 pillars, essentially, which are prevention, protection, participation, and relief and recovery. And essentially, what that means is women's full, equal, and effective participation in all aspects of peace and security. And that means that, we should all be at the table, women as well as people of marginalized genders and identities, but also that we're able to influence the outcomes, not just consultations, but true participation. Protection, safety from violence, including sexual violence, as well as addressing the wider spectrum and continuum of violence that is faced by women and girls, non-binary and trans people, as well as often men and boys from marginalized groups. Prevention, including prevention of all forms of violence and prevention of conflict. So, and relief and recovery, which is more about humanitarian aid and rebuilding. And so we believe that the feminist perspective helps, it helps us look at power structures. It helps us problematize the binary between wartime and peacetime, because we know that violence occurs not just on that binary, it helps us illuminate that spectrum of violence and look at what are some of the root causes of the conflicts that are being, that we see in the world today. So I'll go now into disarmament and demilitarization. And I just want to name quickly that WILPF has an incredible team, Reaching Critical Will, which that's their focus, disarmament. And so I'm citing a lot of their work and expertise as well today. So I really just want to give them that spotlight because they do really incredible work. And disarmament means both the physical removal of weapons, but also the policy and legal frameworks around that action. And there's a wide spectrum of weapons, whether small arms and light weapons, explosive weapons, nuclear weapons, chemical and biological weapons, increasingly cyber weapons, so like cyber attacks, and also, drones. And some member states are looking to develop autonomous weapons, which are like the use of artificial intelligence in order to, to program weapons, which is a scary possibility. And disarmament is distinct from arms control and from non-proliferation. Those are related concepts. A lot of people work on those as well. It's all in the same field, but disarmament is ultimately about removal rather than control of the spread of weapons. And there are a lot of legal instruments that that WILPF and others within this field are working to advocate for better implementation of, including the Arms Trade Treaty, which actually has a provision on gender-based violence, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which a number of member states have signed on to. There's a proposed ban on the development of autonomous weapons, as well as people are currently also working towards an end to the use of explosive weapons in populated areas through a political declaration. There are also emerging issues around cyberspace and outer space, and these are also important for us to keep in mind of how are these other arenas, potentially getting militarized. And unfortunately, at the moment, This is last year was the 7th consecutive year that military spending has increased. The year 2021 military spending reached an all-time high of $2.1 trillion US dollars, and it grew in 3 of the world's regions, Asia and Oceania, Europe and Africa. The US by itself, as many of you might know, is 38% of the world's military spending. The US and China together are 52%. And the top 6 military spenders in the world are the permanent 5 members of the UN Security
Excuse
Council.
me, this is the interpreter. I apologize. Yeah. Would you mind starting from the top when you started giving the military spending numbers and going a little bit slower?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
So this is the 7th consecutive year that military spending has increased. In 2021, military spending reached 2.1 trillion US dollars. And the US by itself is 38% of the world's military spending, and China and the US together are 52%. Ultimately, this is just reflecting the fact that our world is further moving in that direction, and global development indicators are trending in the wrong direction. There's a huge gap between requirements and funding for other things, for health, for well-being, preventing and responding to gender-based violence, et cetera. And so, as I wrap up, I just want to highlight some of the important reasons why we're advocating for this to be, for disarmament and for demilitarization. The first is that disarmament and demilitarization are critical to preventing conflict. They help to reduce tensions among states, and often this can be a site of cooperation. States can work together on disarmament. Small arms and light weapons possession and proliferation can, so like the possession of guns essentially means that there's a heightened risk of sexual and gender-based violence, and that violence is more dangerous and more deadly. More weapons often also makes it less safe to participate in civil society, in public space, in public life. This was recently discussed in one of the Secretary General's reports. Of course, war has devastating impacts on communities. Cyber attacks can impact people differently based on their gender. And that's more complicated than I'll get into at the moment, but it depends on how things like critical infrastructure are defined. Surveillance technologies, which are also often weaponized, can be used, and are used at the moment against marginalized groups, whether it's in policing or through intelligence services. The use of nuclear weapons, when the bomb was used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, has had devastating long-term health impacts. And of course, finally, also the prioritization of weapons, of militaries, diverts very important resources away from health and well-being. So we believe that it's really critical for feminists to be focusing on these things, for drawing these links together, and to recognizing why these things are so essential for the achievement of human rights for all people and to our feminist agendas. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. Really appreciate the framing you provided for us on challenging traditional notions of safety and security, and the clear connections you made between disarmament, demilitarization, gender equality, and peace. I'm going to pass next to Inas Miloud of the Amazigh Women's Movement with the question, Inas, can you unpack proposals for bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights, and why bodily autonomy is crucial in the context of achieving peace and ending conflict?
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Genevieve, for setting the tone for the conversation, making my part is easier. There's so many definitions that need to be put in light, and especially feminist peace and in relation to disarmament and demilitarization is one of them. And I think also like your question about security kind of gives a good introduction with people's feedback of my intervention and how we should constantly challenge what really the traditional sense of how we define security as women, as young people, and also as indigenous and minorities with all our diversities. I'm Ines Miloud, and I've been working for Tamazight movement as the co-founder and the co-executive director, and I've been working since 2016, but that's before that I was also working with different civil society, and I was the coordinator for 1325 network. It's a network that was organized to mobilize and work around the women, peace and security agenda. I'm very happy to be here and really to find this opportunity, because I always feel like conversations like this is not necessarily, they're always happening in silos. So also linking all these different issues are very essential, particularly when it comes to our journey as the Tamazight movement. It's an organization in Libya, sorry, like I feel like I'm rushing through, I have a lot of thoughts in my mind. So we're based in Libya, but it's been crucial for our journey to mature and interlink all of this connections to our work, particularly when it comes to demilitarization. I want first to invite Andrea, if it's okay, to put the video, and then I can also kind of ask a question in response also to your answer to Genevieve's question. We don't have the voice. I'm not sure if it's...
Sorry about that. Maybe I didn't share the sound. Let me try again.
زغية إنه ولدت في قرية في جبل من لما كانت صغيرة وهي تدافع لحقوق الناس.
أطفل الجاج وليش قرار البرة.
أم تعرفت إن في حاجة اسمها محاماة، ولا حلمها أن تولي محامية وتدافع لحقوق الناس، لكن مش كل حلم سهل يتحقق.
ميتوفي كان زلفن التغراد قتوى سجد ونخفنم هنفلي طرابلس.
وبدت رحلة مارن في الجامعة.
توا نتكلموا على حقوق السكان الأصليين والأقليات في الدستور.
القانون أعطيه الحق باستعمال
الأقليات شنو اللي تقول عليهم؟
القانون الليبي يعطيه الحق باستعمال اللغات للأقليات.
احنا كلنا ليبيين لكن عندنا ثقافات متنوعة وكل حد.
بالبساطة هذه كان حلم مارن على وشك النهاية.
كان بتكملي هيك ما عاد بيصير منك.
روحي الحوش نطلعك في الوقت هو.
تقالت نشفى.
الأقليات شنو تقول عليهم ماما؟
كان غسلنا غانا حول يعرف الليل اتغلغي منيلوية نشمخ دمهاش قدرة صنديق
بد في مان ميميرة باش تبدد اليودن يلزت.
3 سنين مارن ما نزلتش الكتاب، قرت وتعبت وسهرت، كسبت ناس، وجاي اليوم اللي تقدر تقول فيه إنها محامية تقدر تدافع لحقوق الناس المظلومة وتقدر تكون سند لعائلتها. هذه قصة مارن، ومازال في هلبة قصص ما سمعناهاش. شاركونا قصصكم بهاشتاج قصة مارن.
Thank you so much. As we're going through my presentation, I would like to invite you to comment how this resonates with you when you think about bodily autonomy and militarization in this video. I think we've done this really in 2018 as part of a really larger program that focuses on inviting indigenous young people, young women particularly, to talk about issues related to human security, right? And as you see, like in this video, people always think about Libya as a conflict zone that we're gonna discuss wars, and there's this stereotypical ways of looking at issues that has to do with security in connections to wars, which is of course correct. That's one part, but the other part is really the human security aspect of that. And when we wanted to bring the human face to these issues, but bring intersectionality into practice. So we have a story of a really young indigenous woman who have migrated because she doesn't have access to education, which is a really true story for a lot of indigenous people. They have to migrate to capital and also deal and adjust with what that means, in addition to the pressure of the society and pressure of family and pressure of community. As you can see, even in the streets, people calling her, please go out, harassing her, why are you there? The fact that her presence there as an indigenous and as a young woman created all of these problems. So I think thinking about security from our perspective, it has to do with all these structural issues. It's not only has to do with what our government, for instance, think about, right? Like I was just in a meeting with our governments, and the whole conversation about security right now in Libya is security of borders. We need more weapons in a country that is exploding with weapons and militarization. And I think finding ways to tackle this issue from this intervention, really, our intention was really to connect younger people, because these are issues of younger people, but also to connect younger people to peace process that is happening in Libya, right? How are we connecting these conversations to the peace process? Because it felt like that formal peace process does not really match the issues and realities of people, because it doesn't necessarily brings all these kind of issues that really young women and young girls are talking about daily in our work. And I think one of the conversations that is happening, especially when we talk about sexual reproductive justice, is always limited in any way to SRG services, which is important. We have issues of accessibility, we have lack of access, especially in cases of victims and victims of rapes, and there's no really safe access to contraceptives and all of that. But SRR also doesn't mean services, it goes beyond that. It's about our bodily autonomy, it's about our bodily integrity. When we consulted different women recently in a healing circle that we have done with feminists, one of the biggest issues that women talked about is actually issues of disarmament and how it connects to their bodies. Like someone in the chat mentioned that security means a freedom of movement, and this is really so much connected to the hyper security presence and hyper militarized presence in Libya, like in the society, within the society. And really a lot of young women also spoke about that fact, spoke about being free to be in public, being free to just walk around without a question whether she's married or not, you know? And I think that aspect is not necessarily understood. It's not necessarily understood. And really, when we're having these formal conversations, people think this is not a priority, and this is not really, it doesn't tackle real issues. But when we are advocating for when we are talking about these issues, we're also bringing the fact that what hypermasculinity means, you know. Sorry, I'm gonna really, I don't know why I feel like I'm looking at myself, so I'll just, it's a bit distracting. I'll try to change the view. Gallery, yeah, that's perfect. So for instance, what that means, really, it's expanding in our definitions when we are talking about masculinities and femininities. And this is really our work at the central to our work to really assert gender equality. But particularly when it comes to hyper masculinity presence and performance of masculinities and its connection to gender biases and gender-based violence. And these connections are really, really lacking. Also, another aspect that's so essential when we talk about also bodily autonomy and also militarization is having actually this language to be included within the peace agreement, right? Within the peace processes. We are also facing a lot of exclusions in Libya, but particularly exclusions of women. I think Genevieve talked about that. One of the impact of militarization is actually the impact on public space and civil society. And that has also translated even within like cases like Libya or Syria or all of that. There's a really systematic exclusions of women, and that also translates that these issues are not being put into light. And as I'm concluding my presentation, I want to offer an opportunity, that this is an opportunity for us to continue the conversation. And I really like that feminist piece encompasses all and offer us opportunity to challenge the radical view of about security, but also we need also to I really love research realizing sexual reproductive justice alliance approach to sexual reproductive justice, because it really expands on interlinkages related to bodily autonomy, bodily autonomy, health, our society, and all of these structural issues and intersectional issues that we're talking about. As an Indigenous person, we see this is so connected. We need to speak so much about these interlinkages to maybe offer a real solutions. And solutions that are speaking on these concrete issues on the ground. And it just as a result of lacking this understanding, we have studied to review, for instance, EU policies on extradition and rule of law and security in Libya recently. And in this, we started looking at how EU are looking at security and impacts of security. And we started actually having this critical view that because of EU's policies, we see the EU policies actually, instead of actually helping migrants, it adds more additional discrimination to migrants, resulting in actually threatening their lives, resulting in the discrimination that is happening in migrant and also indigenous and host communities, but also empowering militarization and militias, because we found this direct link of EU really supporting these militias who are committing human rights violations daily and also harassing civil society, but also particularly feminists and women, right? So I think that's really because of this lacking of lack of understanding of really the importance of feminist peace to inform these policies. I'll attach the link for the report. And last before I wrap up, I just all wanna, like in the end of the Marin's video, there's this connections between the mother and the daughter. And that was really important aspects of that video, because we thought that intergenerational connections and intergenerational teaching has included. As an Indigenous woman, we always think about the knowledge, for instance, of bodily autonomy. Like my sister just like has a baby and she was really struggling for breastfeeding, and she cannot actually access hospitals because hospitals are really over. There's a lot of militias and there's a lot of like security checkpoints. So I think we have to, because we are always pushed to really rely on health systems, which is important to emphasize on health systems, but really we have to also look at our indigenous knowledge and also traditional knowledge to offer really a lot of care for these women, but also in general when we are understanding reproductive justice. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Inas. These are such useful framings, and also really appreciate you centralizing intersectionality and structural transformation in your analysis. So thank you for that. I'll go next to Daniela Philipson of Internacional Feminista. Daniela, how can feminist foreign policies be a tool for true transformation and achieving peace throughout the world? And what constitutes a real feminist foreign policy?
Hi, thank you so much. So I'm going to add this link to the chat. If you could just go to the link and answer the question, just one word or 2 words will suffice. And I will share the results with you by the end of my presentation. And now just, you can input that information while I load my presentation, because I do have some visuals that I would like to share. Okay. Can you see my presentation? Should be a Canva slide that says feminist foreign policy path to
Yes,
peace?
we can see it.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so I will start now. And first of all, I just really want to thank the Women's Major Group for the invitation. And my pronouns are she, her, ella in Spanish. And I am representing Internacional Feminista today, which is a platform that I co-founded with a colleague of mine. And the reason why we decided to begin this platform and to start these efforts was mostly because we started writing about Mexico's Women, Peace and Security National Action Plan, and also in the context of Mexico launching its feminist foreign policy. We were really interested in what was happening, and we wanted to learn more. So what we decided to do was to conduct a thorough investigation or research about Mexico's feminist foreign policy, and then we realized there wasn't that much information. So that led us to write an evaluation and a brief report and publish it under the name of Internacional Feminista. So I also invite you to have a look at our webpage. Currently, the report is only in Spanish, but we're looking to translate it to English and hopefully more languages. So yeah, I'll start sharing a little bit more about feminist foreign policy and also share a little bit more about my research. So I want to start with a quote from Jackie Drew, who has contributed a lot to feminist frameworks in international relations theory. And she writes that international relations key concepts are not neutral or are not natural, and they're also not gender neutral. They are derived from a social and political context where masculine hegemony has been institutionalized. She goes on to say that security is conventionally conceived in international relations as a gender biased concept, because rather than bringing security to individual women, men, and children, it is equated with a situation of stability provided by militaristic states. So I think this brings together what both Inaz and Genevieve have mentioned so far about human security and how this traditional notion of security does not necessarily address the issues that we face in our day-to-day as women in different contexts. That actually is what makes us feel most unsafe. When I was living in Mexico, I remember I was unsafe. I felt unsafe walking down the street at night. And it's because I felt like there were a lot of threats. And for me personally, also when I think about security, I think of feeling comfortable walking on the streets at whatever time. So there's this false dichotomy of war, no war, to define security that doesn't necessarily address the reality of most people. And it's also a dichotomy that makes us think that military is necessary in a way, which is not true when we think about the context of the pandemic or climate change. The military or weapons, arms are not necessarily going to address the root causes or solve any of those issues. So why am I talking about all of this in the context of feminist foreign policy? It's because feminist foreign policy provides a policy framework to address human security and to necessarily reframe away from this traditional militarized concept of security and of negative security, which simply means the absence of conflict, to focus on these multidimensional aspects of peace and of security. And I found this slide, which I really liked. Also, I felt really overwhelmed when I saw it, but I think it covers a lot, and it is really great because it takes you through the different areas and some of the issues that I mentioned, such as conflict, gender, climate, and how feminist foreign policy is a tool that can help us address these issues. I wanted to parse this information in a different way and present it to you, also based on my research and the report that I published with Internacional Feminista. So first, I wanted to address the principles. I think it's important to consider feminist foreign policy is not necessarily comparable because, for example, when we think of Sweden and Sweden's former feminist foreign policy or Canada's feminist foreign policy, and we can't really compare that to Mexico's context or Spain's context, for example. We have to think really of the specific underlying conditions and the local context in which a feminist foreign policy is operating in the countries that are adopting a feminist foreign policy. And there isn't a single blueprint that can be applied. And it would be unfair to universalize a specific and prescriptive policy framework for feminist foreign policy. And there's also no consensus. There are some really great definitions of feminist foreign policy, but there's not a single definition out there. And we've seen that different countries have applied it differently. All of this to say that although there is not a single definition, there are values or there are principles that can guide a feminist foreign policy or that should guide a feminist foreign policy, and that they are adaptable and flexible to different contexts. I think that when we think of values rather than prescriptive specific policies, I think those are more adaptable. And there is a toolkit called Toolkit for Practicing Feminist Foreign Policy in Everyday Life. And that toolkit was published by WILPF Germany, I believe a year ago. Can you hear me okay? There seems to be a sound glitch, but I hope you can hear me okay. Well, anyway, this toolkit lays out 5 principles that should be guiding feminist foreign policy, again, that are applicable to different contexts. So I use that framework and those principles to refine my own, and definitely intersectionality is one of those that WILPF Germany mentions as well, equity, human rights approach and lens. One that is very important for me after analyzing Mexico's feminist foreign policy is coherence. I think it is very important that if there's a feminist foreign policy framework, that should apply both for domestic policies and for the domestic sphere, and should be congruent and should be coherent with domestic policies as well as in the international realm and the foreign policy realm. And that's because countries that have a feminist foreign policy shouldn't be excluding the people who, or their own constituents from feminist policies, right? Applied even at the domestic level. So coherence, I think, is very important. Accountability and transparency. This is also one of our major findings from our evaluation of Mexico's feminist foreign policy. We found that there's very little accountability and very little transparency in terms of what has been the actual impact of the feminist foreign policy. We see that the Mexican Foreign Affairs Secretariat is very vocal and organizes great panels and great events, and does speak to gender equality in multilateral fora. But there are certain areas in which the Mexican government is certainly lacking, and this does not align with the goals that the Mexican government assigned to itself, because it said that it would mainstream a gender perspective across all of its different areas and units within the Foreign Affairs Secretariat, which is not something that we see or we can find out about. We actually, Internacional Feminista, we submitted freedom of information requests because this information was simply not available to the public. And lastly, we think it's very important for there to be a commitment to peace.
Excuse me, this is the interpreter. Can you please slow down a little bit?
Yes,
Thank you
course.
so much.
A commitment to peace is also very important. And here also talking about Mexico, because it's the country where I'm from and it's a country I know best. We see that at the domestic level, the government is militarizing public safety, and that is definitely a concern, and that does not align with its feminist foreign policy, so it's worth considering. Something else I wanted to add to my proposal, and that I think is very important, also one of the main outcomes from our evaluation and my research, is that the process and the design of a feminist foreign policy is very important. And what I mean by that is that processes often define outcomes, and so processes are very important. And some of the guidelines or the approaches that I would recommend or that I consider that are important for feminist foreign policy are that it should be bottom up. The process to design a feminist foreign policy should be in consultation with civil society, with feminists, with women, with marginalized people who are supposed to be at the center of the feminist foreign policy. It should also be an integrated approach that looks at the different silos and doesn't work in silos, but integrates them, right? And we saw that in the first image that I showed when it addresses climate, when it addresses conflict, when it addresses gender. All of these are intertwined, and all of these policies and their implications actually affect one another. So it's important to have a holistic view and work in an integrated framework. It's also really important to also, Genevieve mentioned, to have a root cause analysis that doesn't merely treat the symptoms, for example, of climate justice, but also really addresses the root causes of militarization, which is often rooted in gender inequality or patriarchal systems and norms, and address those in order to then solve for those symptoms. And something else that is very important is having a power feminist analysis and lens that looks at power asymmetries and how to balance those. Something else that I consider very important in the process and the design is substantive participation and representation of feminists, of women, of marginalized communities, who again are at the center of a feminist foreign policy. We consider that it's very important to not design or announce or adopt feminist foreign policies if there aren't any feminists who are actually involved in the process. States and governments have been traditionally somewhat patriarchal, or we can say that they have operated under patriarchal schema. So it is important that they work in collaboration with feminist civil society, at least. And so when you put all of these together, my hypothesis, because I can't really prove this, but my hypothesis says that this will define outcomes and that this will define a policy agenda that seeks to pursue, and this again, not trying to be prescriptive, but a very general level. It will prioritize climate justice. It will prioritize economic justice, demilitarization, and disarmament. And so just to wrap up my presentation, thank you. And I will now share the outcomes of everyone's answers. So just 1 second. Oh, doesn't share. 1 second. Oh, geez. It looks like I can't share for some reason, but I'll take a screenshot in 1 second and send it to you. Apologies for that. But over to whoever's next. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. Really useful to see the core principles of feminist foreign policy laid out, and to hear about your experiences and learnings from the Mexican FFP in particular. I will go now to our last speaker. So I'll pass to Lara-Zuzan Golesorkhi with the question. We know that to achieve peace, we must also ensure the mobility rights of those displaced by conflict and militarism. So what are concrete proposals for ensuring global migrant and refugee rights in the context of achieving peace? And how is ending the violence of borders related to building peace?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction and for having me, and of course for providing a platform to share insights on the nexus between migration, peace, and security, which was already touched upon previously. So this is great to see as part of our collective inquiry into feminist answers to big questions. I'm Dr. Lara-Zuzan Golesorkhi. I'm an assistant professor of political science and global affairs and the co-director of the Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies program at the University of Portland. But I'm also the founder, executive director, and advocacy director at the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice, or CMGJ, which is a nonprofit NGO that addresses human rights at the intersection of migration and gender through research, advocacy, and education. And so my contribution today is part of CMGD's new Spotlight project on migration, peace, and security, which we recently launched in the context of the Paris Peace Forum. So before I begin, just a quick note on language. I will use the term migrant broadly throughout this presentation, as it encompasses a spectrum of migratory experiences, including forced migration. So when we think about how peace can be achieved in the context of migration, I would like to share this quote from Dr. John Bosco, a scholar, researcher, lecturer, former refugee, policy advisor, and advocate, as part of a global consultation on migration and peace building, of which we were part earlier this year. And so in exploring the linkage between peace building and migration, he stated, quote, "If you ask a lot of kids in a refugee camp to write poems, without giving them a hint, most of them will write poems about peace. And that's the universal thing within the refugee and migrant communities in all marginalized societies, where the first thing that comes to mind when you ask them to write a poem is actually peace. And if you ask them to draw, they'll often draw guns and consequences of conflict, the lack of peace in a way, and how that dramatically changes their life for the worse." And so similar experiences were shared by other peace building practitioners, humanitarian workers, and migration justice advocates at the global consultation, speaking to the idea that peace can be understood as a fundamental quest behind migration. That when peace is achieved, migration can truly be a matter of free human mobility rather than a decision driven by conflict, violence, and disaster, for instance. And so here I would like to invite you all to share your thoughts and to pause for a moment and to have us reflect together and what it would mean to create such a condition of peace, where migration can truly be a matter of free human mobility rather than a decision driven by conflict, violence, and disaster, with the guiding question being, what's the role of peace building in the context of migration? And so I'll post this in the chat, and I encourage all of you to share your thoughts on this, and then we can return to this as I proceed with the presentation. So when we think about peace building and its relationship to migration and building on this, right? Here are some concrete proposals for how peace can be achieved by ensuring migrant rights, which was the prompting question for my contribution here today. A first proposal would be to incorporate migration experiences into conflict analysis. Peace builders are well positioned to conduct conflict analyses and hereby gain an understanding of the consequences for migration. And this understanding can lead to co-development of programs with local and international actors that takes into account migrant rights. A second proposal that I would like to share here is to acknowledge and include migrants in reconciliation processes. Acknowledging and addressing the harm of migrants as a result of conflict in reconciliation processes can go a long way in terms of healing processes from the violence that migrants experience, in line with restorative justice practices, for instance. And relatedly, ensuring participation of migrant communities in peace processes, which presents another way through which peace can be achieved by ensuring migrants' rights. And this must involve an understanding of the complexity of migratory experiences, the diversity of identities and views amongst migrants, and to understand how complexity impacts their participation in peace processes as well. A fourth proposal that I would like to put forth here is to apply conflict analyses to understand the violence of dehumanizing migrants. And so this is a particularly crucial one when we think about destination countries and conflict in that sense. So to recognize and address how the dehumanization of migrant communities through rhetoric and policy, normalizes and exacerbates violence towards migrants globally, which then implicitly condones migrant rights violations, for instance. And lastly, to raise awareness and share knowledge around the migration peace security nexus. And so this means addressing the often siloed nature of peace building on the one hand, development on the other, and then humanitarian work, and considering the implications of conflict, violence, and disaster for migration. And this last point is particularly imperative to ensuring migrant rights, as for instance, in this year, and so in 2022, the number of people seeking protection due to conflict, violence, and disaster has exceeded 100 million, resulting in migration within and across borders. And so to address these mixed migration patterns caused by conflict, violence, and disaster, regional refugee response plans, or RRPs, and regional migrant response plans, RMRPs, have emerged as key protection frameworks. And these response plans involve multi-partner, multi-sector strategies and funding requirements for priority areas as established based on region-specific needs. And so across these response plans, gender-based violence has been identified as a priority area, yet programming and funding for gender-based violence prevention, mitigation, and response remains limited. And so this requires feminist responses to big questions such as this. And this is really kind of the motivation and inspiration for our newly launched project, Migration, Peace, and Security. As we connect protection frameworks in the context of conflict, violence, and disaster with considerations around peace and security, the objective of the project is to monitor response plans in regards to gender responsiveness, with a focus on gender-based violence, and to provide recommendations to stakeholders as it concerns operational and funding structures. And so our project is global in scope, and it spans across regions, including response plans for the Horn of Africa and Yemen, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Venezuela, and Bangladesh. And this work builds on our ongoing efforts as a signatory to the Women, Peace, and Security Humanitarian Action Compact, and our ongoing work around the RMRP Venezuela, which was launched in 2019. So to offer a little bit more insights here and the importance of the project, and to give you a sense of what we hope to do, possibly in collaboration with you if this is of interest, allow me just to share some preliminary findings from our work on Venezuela. And so what we plan to do for each of these response plans as a first step is to identify high-risk spaces for gender-based violence along migratory routes and in destination countries, as well as prevailing protection gaps as it pertains to gender-based violence prevention, mitigation, and response. And so in the case of Venezuela, data indicates that border crossings, temporary shelters, and transit points present high-risk gender-based violence spaces. And in regards to protection gaps, what we found from our research, it indicates that there are challenges in collecting data because of underreporting of gender-based violence, as well as limited gender-based violence services for survivors and resources in this regard. And this, as a next step, then again, as part of these response plans, we analyze operational structures, so programming and funding structures, so money flows for the respective response plans. In the case of Venezuela, here's what we looked into in terms of operational structures: the existence of working groups or subsectors around gender-based violence, as well as the existence of protection from sexual exploitation and abuse networks, for instance, which are quite prevalent within the field of humanitarianism. And then for funding structures, we looked into funding received, funding required, and also how funding streams are ultimately assigned. And so there's a lot that we found, and the graphic gives you kind of a sense of some of the main findings. But what I would like to highlight here is that overall, in the case of Venezuela and the response plan, only 2% of the entire financial budget requirement to address gender-based violence has been met as of recently, so as of 2020. 2022. And when it comes to funding requirements by countries that are involved in the response plan, we see similarly low percentages and thus amounts of gender-based related funding, especially in Colombia, where 0% of the funding requirements have been met. Yet Colombia is one of the main destination countries for those displaced from Venezuela, and it actually has the largest subsector in terms of gender-based violence with 26 partners. The last finding that I would like to point out here is that funding has declined significantly over the last 2 years, not only in amounts, but also in the number of funding streams and thus partners as part of operational structures that have received funding, with most funding consistently across countries from our research, showing that it has gone to intergovernmental organizations, not local or national organizations. And so what can we do with these findings? And so our aim with the project is to provide recommendations for stakeholders on gender-based violence operational funding structures to implement response measures targeted and specific to the needs and challenges of women, girls, LGBTQIA+, and gender diverse migrants. And by December 14th, the 4-year mark of the response plan for Venezuela, we will share these updates from our findings and concrete recommendations. So stay tuned for this. And with that, I would just like to say, in concluding my contributions, again, extending an invitation to all of you to partner with us on this project, especially if you work in the context of any of the regions that we've mentioned. And also just to put out there that we at the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice are inspired and motivated to create a thematic working group on migration within the Women's Major Group, particularly in the lead up to the 2023 Global Refugee Forum. And so we envision this working group to be a space for organizing, information, and resource sharing, as well as partnerships and projects such as this, because a different world requires feminist responses, and we're all here for it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lara-Zuzan. Such an important contribution to this work, and exciting to hear about your ongoing efforts. So that's all of our speakers. So we have lots of time now to answer questions. If anybody has a question, please feel